Welcome to Mount Daisen. This sacred mountain in the heart of Tottori Prefecture is home to something very special, which is today's focus. Yesterday we were in the Tottori Sakyu, and today we're on the hunt for the Japanese Giant Salamander, practically a living fossil, one of the oldest animals in the world, and can be found only in this part of Japan. They're quite elusive, you can't really see them at daytime, but we're going to have a look. So we're going to be hiking up the river, and hopefully we find a big one.
An hour and 30 minutes away from the Tottori Sakyu stands Mount Daisen, regarded as the most holy mountain in Japanese Shugendo, and, in legend, is said to be the stake that the islands of Japan were pulled from the ocean by the gods. This history of the mountain meant that it was forbidden to cut down the beech forest that surround the mountain or even enter the peak. As history went on, the surrounding landscape was developed, but because of this sacred history, the environment has remained very pure in Daisen. And because of that, Japanese giant salamanders have been able to survive since ancient times. The beech forests act as a natural water filter and add minerals and nutrients to the water table. There is a lot of rainfall in Daisen, as there is in most of Japan, but this unique landscape allows the water to not only flow downstream, but up from the natural springs and from the sides of the canyons. And this is wonderful for the salamanders, but not so much for the humans.
That's really the problem, is that because there's so much rain and water in the area, Japan loves to make construction along the rivers so that they can, don't flood the area as much, as well as like putting up walls that prevent tsunamis and things like that. Unfortunately, that means that it's very hard for the salamanders because they need to migrate upstream when they need to spawn, and they can't climb up the cement dams, and they can't burrow in the cement walls. There has been some efforts to try and make some burrows for them, but they're not quite well suited for them. The entrance is too big. It makes the salamanders nervous. Like, they need like a small entrance that they can protect and guard, because they believe the fathers of the salamanders are very protective of the young. And but they need like a big sort of cavernous area on the inside to live, but then a small entrance that they can guard. And hopefully we're going to find some, but if this rain doesn't let up, it might be very difficult to film them. We do have some waterproof stuff. I would love to get the drone up and show you the beauties of the countryside around Mount Daisen. So the forecast is supposed to stop raining in about 4 hours at 4 o'clock. It's about lunchtime. I'm actually really hungry to skip breakfast today. And then tomorrow is meant to be perfect weather, so putting a lot of importance on tomorrow. So provided everything goes well, we should have some pretty cool footage. Anyway, see you then.
Fortunately, the weather did improve, briefly being distracted by chasing an anaguma, which means whole bear in Japanese. It's kind of a small badger, and getting lost on the mountain.
So I guess I'm going to have to turn around here. That's a shame. It was a nice little mountain path.
I had to meet up with the rest of the team. In the last Tales for Tottori, I hinted that my purpose for the trip, not just a holiday, I was here to shoot a short documentary for the Save the Japanese Giant Salamander campaign, founded by Richard, who so graciously would be my host for the duration, to help raise awareness about the human encroachment and destruction of the ancient creature's habitat. While the salamanders are protected and classified as a protected natural monument, there are no protections on the rivers where they live. Giant salamanders are called Osan Shoho in Japanese, which means giant pepperfish due to the strong smell they produce when threatened. They have an amazing life cycle, starting at just 3 centimeters and growing to up to 1.5 meters, and maybe the largest living amphibian in the world. The Chinese giant salamander can grow to almost my height at 1.8 meters, but unfortunately these are no longer found in the wild, which is why it's so important to protect these remaining creatures. As natural monuments, it is forbidden to disturb or even touch the salamanders. Fortunately for this trip, we are joined by Dr. Sumio Okada, the world's leading expert on salamanders, to undertake a research mission to record biometric data and record the population numbers. And please don't make fun of my short pants in the comments, they're the longest I can afford here. Dr. Okada explains to us the issues facing the salamanders. While when they are born they have gills like you might see on an axolotl, as they mature into adults they grow lungs, but primarily breathe through their skin, so fast, clear, oxygen-rich water is very important for them while in their burrows or underwater feeding. Pesticides and runoff from farms pose a serious problem by contaminating the water source. As I mentioned earlier, dams and weirs are another significant problem for the salamanders. The tall, smooth concrete structures make it very difficult for them to move upstream. It is normal during heavy rainfall periods for salamanders to be washed down the stream after a flood, or even have their burrows destroyed, but normally they will travel back upstream into the forest area and rebuild. Unfortunately, this just isn't possible with the weirs, and many adult individuals become stranded downstream in the warmer and muddy regions, which isn't great for them. One of the goals of Dr. Okada and the Save the Salamander project is to research and install bypass slopes for the salamanders to use as ramps to be able to climb back up the rivers themselves. Unfortunately, they cannot be moved back by hand due to their protected status and simply not knowing where in the forest they belong, so it is vital to install these ramps and allow them to return by themselves. Giant salamanders are long, thick, and they look like a big old lizard, which may make them the inspiration for one of the most famous yokai in Japan, which are supernatural entities called the Kappa, similar to a Tanifa or Banyap. That probably just sounds like nonsense to people not from the southern hemisphere, so let me explain. Kappa means river child. It is depicted as an amphibious greenish humanoid imp with webbed hands and feet, a turtle-like shell on their backs, and a dish on their head that holds sacred water. In legend, they are found in rivers and ponds around Japan. They are clumsy on the land, but agile in the water. Not necessarily evil, but troublemakers. Their deeds can range from merely picking up a woman's kimono, or to outright drowning people and kidnapping their children. But most horrifying of all, they are often accused of stealing a mythical organ from humans called the shirikodama, which I'm not making this up, is a ball that they take from Uranus. Kappa are strange folk. They love cucumbers and sumo wrestling, and are very polite. Bowing to a kappa forces it to bow in turn, which means that the mystical water from its head can spill out, weakening or incapacitating the kappa. However, should you find yourself facing a particularly irate kappa, you have two options: a sumo wrestle into submission, or, and I'm still not making this up, you can fart them away. But be warned, as the kappa has 3 anuses and 3 times the gas a human can produce to match, so you might need 2 friends to take one down. Should you subdue a kappa, they may reward you by bringing you fish or irrigating your farmland. But ask yourself, is it really worth it? Oh, and since you're here, why don't I tell you about my favorite yokai, Shirime. Long ago, a samurai was walking down a dark and lonesome road in Kyoto when he heard someone calling for him to wait.
Huh? What was that noise?
He asked nervously, then turned around and found a man stripping off all his clothes and pointing his bare buttocks at the traveler. A huge eye opened where the man's anus should have been and started to stare at him. The samurai fled in terror, and that's the whole story. While other yokai might lead you to your death or kidnap your children, Shirime, whose name literally means butt eye, is solely motivated by surprising people at night, giving them the stink eye, then running off, laughing. Absolute mad lads. What were we talking about? Salamanders or something? Oh yes. We start by assisting Dr. Okada in capturing and taking biometric data from some particularly large salamanders caught in the lower part of the river, returning later that night to head into the deep forest. While waiting for nightfall, Richard, Arko and myself head out to research the damage to the river and interview some locals, who I have to say were some of the nicest people, including Sumi-sensei, a local priest who gave us his sake that I'm enjoying while editing. After the long day, with night quickly falling, it was time to head to the secret mountain spot. Led by Dr. Okada, we were searching for both new and old salamanders. You see, the salamanders are quite long-lived and have a very slow life cycle. But this is part of the problem, because if something happens to the population, adult salamanders would persist in the area for 20 years or longer before we would even know there was an issue, then suddenly start to disappear as the adults die. And at this point, it would be much too late to do anything for them. As the night wanes on, we travel deeper and deeper into the river, pushing our way through bamboo and debris from landslides. Around 11 PM, we find our first wild forest salamander, and checking to see if it had a tag, we discover that it was last captured 15 years ago, an amazing reunion. After recording the data, we release it and continue on. The salamanders are ambush predators and almost perfectly camouflaged in the river. Another hour in and we find our second salamander, a younger and smaller one, but again previously caught. We were beginning to become worried. And then, just as energy and optimism was getting low, bingo, A quick capture by Dr. Okada, we had discovered a new salamander, assisting Okada in tagging and taking its data. It was decided to name this newly encountered creature in my honor.
Smelling Joshua.
ごめんね、ジョシュア。
Smelly Joshua.
Well, come on guys, please, it's been a long night and we've been walking through the river for hours. Come on. Shortly after, finding a second, smaller salamander, which Akko named after her daughter Emmy. The night was a success. As we made our way out of the forest, in the early hours of the morning, Dr. Okada and the team were overjoyed. We had succeeded in finding evidence that the salamander population in Daisen was continuing to grow, and with hopes for the future, I headed home. I'll include here a secret link to the documentary. The campaign isn't quite live yet, but you can check it out here as a sneak peek. You can also check out Richard's website, bushidojapan.com, to learn more about the campaign. Tottori is a beautiful and rugged part of Japan, but also the smallest prefecture by population, perhaps due to its mountainous landscape and no access by high-speed bullet train. But maybe this is for the best, as it would be wonderful if it remained a pristine environment for Japan's biodiversity and the giant salamanders, which hopefully can remain for generations to come. And who knows, maybe in 20 years I'll go back and meet little smelly Joshua once again. And coming up on an arc adventure, taking a break in Hawaii. Wait a second, that's not Hawaii. You trying to trick me?